Hey, morning, everybody. Welcome to The Sweat, presented by DraftKings. I am Emerson Lotzia. A lot to get to in only 55 minutes or so to get to it. DraftKings contributors. We got Matt Meiselman, Pierce Dietrich, and Reed T. Fowler here. We're going to start with football, the NFL. We got NBA and NHL coming up. Tell me, high or low here? These DFS salaries or odds too high or too low? Let's start on the DFS side of things with a hybrid high or low and price check. Tyreek Hill sits atop all salaries this week, dudes. $8,500. That's a $100 increase from last week. And last week, by the way, he racked up just north of 4 DK fantasy points. So against the Raiders this week, Reed T. Fowler, is that salary too high or too low? Nobody knows the Raiders better and more than you do.
As a well-dressed host.
Oh,
Emerson,
look at this. Look at us matching. Yeah. This is us, dude.
Not even planned. Not even planned. But I will say that as you were talking, I was distracted by that beautiful hoodie you're wearing. And look, I think it's fine, right? Because we don't have Cooper Kupp, we don't have Adams, we don't have Jefferson on the main slate. So I think it's fine. I don't think it's too high at all. And when you take a look at what he does against the Raiders, or what the Chiefs have done against the Raiders, it makes a lot of sense. Am I going to be paying for it? Probably not, right? Travis Kelsey is that guy in that game that I probably want to pay up for. Just because every single game, twice a year, Travis Kelsey rolls and he sees that silver and black and he goes absolutely bazonkers, if that's even a word. So I'm not going to be paying up for that. I want to pay up for the running backs. But yeah, I think it's fine.
All right, Pierce, his worst game of the season against the Broncos last time out. But this time around against the Raiders, is he worth the beefy price tag?
Yeah, he's always worth the beefy price tag. Yeah. He's always going to be too low based on his ceiling. You can't ignore the fact that he has these 2 to 3, sometimes 4 or 5 big games every season. Yes, his ceiling games have been few and far between, but that's the case for everyone. No one goes out there and hits their ceiling every single week, and I have no problem paying that price. And even with him not hitting his ceiling every week, he's having a really good season. It kind of gets lost in the mess that is Kansas City. We know their offensive line's not playing well. Mahomes isn't playing well. In general, the team's not playing well. But he's close to 100 receptions already and 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. So even in a down year where he's not 100% healthy, he's still producing. He still had those ceiling games. And as Reed mentioned, if there is a game where he can absolutely crush and have one of those ridiculous scores that we expect, it's against Las Vegas.
All right, Matty goes 7 for 83 and 2 tutties in week 10. Do you expect him to regain the bounce in his step this week?
It's really hard to say. I honestly think this is a very difficult team for the guys making the prices to figure out. I think this is just a tough job because the Chiefs are just so inconsistent this year. They've had a lot of games where their defense has just kept the other team off the scoreboard, and Mahomes hasn't needed to do very much. So, yes, he struggled, but there have just been these game scripts. Last week was a good example where the Broncos did nothing offensively, and the Chiefs just didn't need to pass very much. So I feel like it's probably a little too high, but there's always upside for Tyreek Hill to score 40 or more fantasy points. It's just you don't really know when it's going to be. And this kind of feels like a week where the Chiefs won't need the scoring. They're pretty big favorites. But if the defense regresses a little bit and maybe they don't play as great as what they've been playing, maybe Mahomes does need to do more. So I'm a little torn on this one. I feel like it is worth a shot, but maybe it's just a little bit too high of a price where there are some good receivers that are a little lower.
All right, his teammate Travis Kelsey is the most expensive tight end at $7,400. And this position, Pierce, is really where you have started to shine. So last week's fantasy star at this position, George Kittle, $6,900. That's a $1,000 increase from last week. He went north of 42 fantasy points. That was 18.5 points higher than his previous best game. So at 6'9" against the Bengals, is Kittle's price too high?
No, it's not. And if you paid down at tight end last week, you lost. You had to pay up for Kittle when he has these explosive games, and he can do it. And so based on his upside, his price is never really going to be too low. We saw him explode last week. You had to have him. We've seen this a couple times in previous seasons where he absolutely demolishes the slate. And this could definitely be another week. If Samuel's in or even if he is out, doesn't matter. Kittle is their number one guy. You watched that play last week where he's tiptoeing down the sideline. He's wide receiver number 1. He's the main target on this team, and he's priced like an expensive tight end as opposed to a really good wide receiver in a really good position with a lot of expected volume. And even if he has an average game, it's still not going to kill you. I don't know if I will go there. I always pay down at tight end, but based on his ceiling, it's too low.
Matty, how much of this is recency bias? How much of this is the matchup?
I think it's closer to recency bias, and I think it's really the Deebo Samuel didn't play last week bias. And this is really tough because Deebo has turned into more of a running back in recent weeks, and it's just kind of hard to know if that hamstring injury that's kept him out, like what that's going to do for his role. But I think that's only one of two reasons to not like Kittle as much this week. This game also is going to have pretty bad weather, and I just don't think it's as good of a passing environment as maybe people are expecting. And it's just like it's a high price now, and I don't think that Kittle is a secret. Like he just had this monster game. He definitely could have another big game, but Deebo just being there, whether he's getting more carries and maybe the Niners just run the ball more because they have this wide receiver / running back gadget player who's like just legitimately amazing at everything he seems to do. And then Deebo could catch more passes and Kittle gets less targets that way. So I think if Kittle were contrarian again, I would like it. But there's a lot of good tight ends, and I think Deebo coming back hurts him a little bit.
All right, Reed T. Fowler, even if Deebo Samuel, is back, he's not likely to be ready to contribute his typical load, right?
Yeah, and look, Eli Mitchell is banged up. It seems like Eli Mitchell is banged up every single week, right? He's got a concussion, he's got a knee thing, and like I think that matters because Shanahan wants to give him, 27 carries. And look, I think Deebo in or out, I think it does actually make a difference, right? Because we've seen Kittle get two games this year with double-digit targets. First game didn't really do that well, but second game he did, obviously extremely well, 2 touchdowns. The bad thing about Kittle is he's so good, right? That sounds weird. He's such a good tight end. He's a really good run blocker. If what Matt is saying is true and they get out and they just want to run the ball, they're not going to put Kittle out and run him, in massive routes and give him 12 targets because he's so good in the run game, and he'll do that, right? He doesn't need those 12 targets. I would want to pay down, so just by proxy of that, I think it's too high. But to what Pierce was saying, man, this guy is an absolute monster. And if you take a look at him compared to other like receivers, he's a guy that's priced potentially too low. And that's what we have to do with guys like Waller, Kelsey, and Kittle. Is these guys are just really big receivers, and if that's the case, then yeah, I think it's a little bit too low.
All right, Mr. Meiselman, let's go over to the DK Sportsbook here. Ravens, let's see, they're favorites in the division, right? They're leading the division, but they are underdogs in Cleveland this week. These two teams played just a couple weeks ago. Baltimore's banged up, we know that. So how do you feel here about the 3-point spread?
I wish I could have a better insight about the Ravens' injuries. Like it's so many players that it's really hard to quantify, and different coaches they have different levels of capability at making up for the fact that certain guys are not playing at full strength or out or whatever. What I do feel like is true, though, regardless of how injured some of these Ravens guys are, is that everything is baked into this line. Like if the Ravens were at full strength, there's absolutely no way that they're getting a full field goal in Cleveland. I think the Ravens would be a much better team if everyone's healthy and Lamar's kind of playing normal. So it does seem like all of that information is already baked in to the point where like it doesn't seem plausible that there's more value on the Browns at -3. But it's not like I'm excited to take the Ravens here either because I'm just kind of worried about this team. They clearly have been struggling over most of the season, actually. So overall, I think it's probably a fairish line, but like I just have very little confidence in predicting what's going to happen in this game.
You think this spread read is too high or too low? So like too long, too short?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say from this standpoint, like I'm with Matt on not really knowing what the Ravens are doing, and they lose Marlon Humphreys as well, right? This team has just been absolutely riddled with injuries from the start in the preseason. But I will say this though, and why I think Cleveland this line is a little bit too like it's just too high for Cleveland, right? I think the swing is just too much. Remember 2 weeks ago, before Cleveland went on their bye, they played Baltimore. And now we're having a 5-point swing, 5.5 or 6-point swing, wherever this spread lands towards Cleveland. Do we really think that Baker Mayfield and all of his injuries, with no receiver, and we talked about this yesterday with David Njoku being their best receiver now out, do we really think that this team is a 6-point swing, right? Just because they went on a bye, they didn't play, and the Ravens are playing, under expectation? I don't think so. So I'll side with the Ravens on this one, but I'm with Matt here and I have no idea what's going to happen in this game because we've seen Lamar throw 4 interceptions and we've also seen him go for 300 yards and, run for 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, and his legs will probably be a huge factor in this one, Pierce. The Ravens have not been good in their recent road games either. 2-5 ATS in their last 7 road games.
It's too high, and I'm by no means a Ravens fan. I believe they're a pretty fraudulent team. They're a bad team. But you know what? Just because they don't win with style points, they're not consistent. But when it comes to converting on specific third downs, when it comes to getting off the field when they need to get off the field or getting points when they need them or preventing points, they seem to get it done, and that's what their record says. And there's a reason why they're leading the division. They win these games when they shouldn't. But yet, I think they're still going to pull this off. Lamar Jackson will get the plays when he needs to get the plays. And just to reiterate the point, we don't really know what to expect in terms of injuries from the Ravens. They put 15 guys on the injury report last week, and most of them suited up. We do know that they've lost Marlon Humphrey, and that's a pretty big loss in secondary. But then again, their secondary wasn't that great with him last season. Their secondary hasn't been that great with him this season. He's one of the best cornerbacks, but it really hasn't translated. They're still allowing a lot of big plays. They're missing tackles. But with all these things that we're saying about him being inconsistent, the defense being inconsistent, they still win games. I think they can win this thing outright.
Fashionista, Reed T. Fowler. Let's go back to the San Francisco offense here. 49ers and the Bengals have the second highest game total on Sunday. So we're looking at 49 points right now. Is that actually too low for this one between a couple offenses that are putting up 25 and 27 points a game?
No, we should definitely take this act to Fashion Week in Paris next.
Yes,
Emerson.
babe. You and me
Yeah,
just wearing the same hoodie for like 7 straight days.
That's disgusting. No, I actually think this is too high. I know Pierce and Jeff really like this game to go over, but I actually think this is a little bit too high, and I side with the under. No Logan Wilson in the run game, or excuse me, for Cincinnati. I think that goes a little bit more towards, and like Matt was talking to, alluding to, the run game being a little bit more prevalent for San Francisco. And I mentioned 90% of the cash was on the under yesterday. It's now gone up to 94% of the cash on the under, which is a pretty substantial move when you talk about how much money and these things can swing in terms of how the bet and how the line moves. I just don't think that this line, even though you have some offensive powerhouses on that Cincinnati side in Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow's dealing with the pinky injury. He says it's fine, but who knows? I'm going to actually side with the under on this one. I think it's a little bit getting too much inflated in the market right now, and I like the under.
All right, which side would you be backing here, Pierce?
I'm sticking with the over. I know Matt's going to bring up the weather, but if you guys remember last week, Chargers at Cincinnati, we brought up the weather there, and it didn't seem to matter. They scored a ton of points. Those offenses looked fine in non-preferential Cincinnati weather. I think Cincinnati's going to be fine in this game. They're facing a secondary that's going to be without Emmanuel Mosley, Josh Norman, as I mentioned in previous shows, 49.6 PFF grade. The weapons are there for Burrow. The issue with Burrow this season in his losses, if he's facing around a 30% pressure rate, which is extremely high, but he has in the 5 losses. You look at San Francisco and you look at all the metrics in terms of quarterback hurries, knockdowns, pressure, they're the worst in football. So Burrow, even with the broken finger, at least it's not a mallet finger, whatever that one is too. I'm learning a bunch about fingers this week. It's been quite amazing. Don't Google any of this stuff, by the way. It's not very fun. I think Burrow's going to be fine. He's not going to deal with a lot of pressure. He's got the weapons. They'll get the points. Got to wait to see what the injuries are for San Francisco, though.
Okay, Matt, this total here, man, too high or too low?
I think it's too high also. And yeah, I don't want to reiterate the weather too much. It is going to be cold there. But I think what's happened with the Bengals is that they've played in a bunch of games where the defenses have created a lot of points. And I just don't think that that's something we can bank on. Like, I think the recent games have just had a lot of, whether it's pick sixes or fumble recoveries or just short fields resulting from turnovers. That's probably not something that is going to be sustainable going forward. And then I am worried about Joe Burrow, like Reed said. I think that in general, Burrow has been a lot more inconsistent this year than people realize. And we've seen these huge games and we've seen some really bad games. And I guess both extremes can create offense, but I think with the finger injury, there's a good chance we see the Bengals want to run the ball more. I think with Deebo Samuel playing, we see the Niners want to run the ball more, which just sounds very strange, right? Their best wide receiver is back, so they're going to run more, but their best wide receiver happens to maybe also be their best running back. So I think this could be a game because of the weather a little bit, and then just because of the circumstances on both teams where we just see a lot more running. I think the Bengals might actually be worried enough about Burrow's health to just not have him throw as much as he normally does.
Okay, Pierce, let's wrap it up in South Florida here. Big matchup between the Bills and the Bucks. Bucks are 3.5-point favorites against a Buffalo team that's on a short week. The Bucks haven't lost at home this season, 5-0. So is that spread too low for a couple teams who might be going in opposite directions here?
Too low. I like the Bucks at home a lot. Tom Brady's played a lot better at home. You look at his passing versus interceptions at home versus on the road. He's a completely different player. And then also Buffalo is just an overrated team. They faced an easy schedule, and in that easy schedule, they were able to get up a touchdown or two on their opponents. That made their opponents play one-dimensionally, and then it was easy for them to stop one-dimensional offenses. And so it looks like, oh, yeah, these guys have a really good defense. Well, they were just in really positive game scripts that makes their rush defense and pass defense look better than it is. Plus, they've lost Tre'Davious White. That's going to hurt. I think they're really going to struggle. I mean, we have seen them struggle against teams that can establish a run, against teams that can remain balanced on offense, and Tampa should be able to do that. I like Tampa Bay a lot. This line's too low for me.
Okay, too high or too low, this spread, Matt?
It's hard to say. I think we don't really know what kind of impact the loss of Tre'Davious White is going to have, because last week the Patriots didn't even test that at all. Like, they literally didn't throw the ball. I mean, the couple times they did, they were just dump offs over the middle. So I don't really know how much of this is going to matter. Obviously, he's a great player, but my lean is that the line is too high. I just don't really buy into this entire narrative that the Bills can only beat bad teams and they can't beat good teams. I think football seasons are not very long. We've only had 12, 13 games, and it's just like, this is the trend that's happened so far, but I don't think it's necessarily predictive of what will happen going forward. The Bills are a good team just based on like what we know of them over the last couple seasons, like just their efficiency numbers this year. If you just look at the full picture and don't just throw away all the games where they played teams who were worse than them, like, it still matters that they have some blowout wins over mediocre teams. And the Bucs are really good too. Like, I think the Bucs are the better team, especially with White out of the lineup. But 3.5 is a big deal. Like, if the line were 2.5, I would say it's too low. At 3.5, I kind of think it's a little too high. Like, I think Bucs should be favored by right around a field goal. So if I have to pick, I think the line's a little too high.
Yeah, Reed, and Bucs have played well at Raymond James Stadium this season. 4-0 ATS in their last 4 home games.
Yeah, thank God Matt's on here, the voice of reason. And we got Jeff and his blabbering on about how Buffalo's not good. At least Pierce is here to back up what Jeff is probably what he was going to say. But I'm actually in agreement with Matt. I'd actually think that the Bills money line, even if it gets at 3, to what Matt was saying, I think the Bills money line at plus 145 is definitely in play. So I think this is too high. I don't think there is any value at 3. Like, this is the highest total I think on the slate here, and you have both teams who can score at a pretty impressive clip, right? They can have these one or two big plays, and they can really, put up the points. We saw that with Tampa Bay and Indianapolis just a couple of weeks ago. And the Bucs defense too, they're probably going to be without Jamel Dean. I think he might be out. That's their best defensive player in the secondary that's already banged up. This is an extremely aggressive defense in Tampa Bay, and that's the case, and Buffalo figures it out. And last week was nothing, like Matt was talking about. They held the Patriots to 14 points, 3 pass attempts. I still think the Bills are a good team, but having said that, I'm going to say that it's a little bit too high. I think that the Bills, who have no run game, are going to have to pass a ton in this game, and I think it's too high.
All right, Matt, do me a favor, please hang out, because we need you to help us build a money-making NBA lineup later in this show. Reed and Pierce, you two will be joined by the Jeff Ulrich to discuss Thursday Night Football Showdown picks and Jeff's obsession with primetime Kirk Cousins. I'm sure he'll have an update of him chopping ice in his driveway. Reed, we woke up and received some very interesting pictures from him this morning. But right after this break, we will see which players our hockey panel, speaking of ice, is chasing tonight. We got 10 games scheduled around the NHL tonight. Some exciting, meaty matchups as well. Good morning to our hockey panel. NFL Fantasy on Ice host Pete Jensen, RotoWire's Paul Bruno, and AJ Scholes. Looking at some of the top DFS options available on this slate, gentlemen. Pete, let's start with you, dude. Who are you going to build around at center?
Well, there are obviously the two Edmonton guys that I would try to work into your lineup any chance you can get, but I wanted to mention Matthew Barzell, who's heating up right now for the New York Islanders. He has a 4-game point streak. The Islanders quietly have a 4-game point streak. I know they just got their first win in 12 games last time out, but keep an eye on Nashville's goalie situation. If Saros is not there, I like to hammer the Islanders and the Matthew Barzell play in DFS for $5,800. He has a great career points per game average, 0.86. That's high-end talent, and he's one of the best zone entry players in the league. So I do think over time, maybe starting tonight, could be the first win at the new barn for the Islanders, and they could be off and running from there. So I would get Matthew Barzell into your lineup against Nashville here.
Okay, Paul, do you agree you got to try to work that Edmonton duo in there of Draisaitl and McDavid? Both guys would cost you north of $9,000.
No, I'm fading them. The team's not playing very well lately. Instead, I'm looking at a couple of mid-range guys who are their team's respective number one centers. They're both playing very well heading into tonight's action, and they have great matchups. First, I'll begin with Ryan Hartman of the Wild for $6,600. He's putting together a career-best season with 21 points in 25 games played. He's on a point-per-game pace with 38 shots on goal over his last 10 outings, and has a nice matchup in San Jose tonight. Then there's Trevor Zegras, who used one of my old moves from a few years ago to set the Twitter sphere on its edge in his last game. I'm more impressed by the consistency he's shown this season with 22 points in 25 games, and is carving out an early reputation as a premier setup guy, just like his captain Ryan Getzlaf. And he has 12 points, all assists, and 32 shots on goal over his last 10 starts. And he gets a good matchup against Columbus tonight, priced at only $6,100.
Okay, AJ, what's your strategy here at center?
Well, unfortunately, my strategy is to agree with Paul and to fade the top of the group here. Toronto's playing Tampa Bay. You've got Edmonton and Boston. Like, you have all these top centers going against each other. So I'm a little leery. And I also landed on Ryan Hartman at $6,600 for Minnesota. The team has 12 goals in their last 3 games. He has just one of those. 2 games without a point is his longest slump of the season. He's never gone this long, and I use air quotes on that, this long with a slump here. So I do think Ryan Hartman's the play. I think Dylan Larkin is another guy to consider here. Look, St. Louis is once again going to be fielding only 17 skaters tonight. They're going to be using Charlie Lindgren, who really is probably their 4th choice keeper, but because of the cap situation, they actually can't bring up the 3rd choice guy. It's a disaster there in St. Louis tonight. So I do like Dylan Larkin here, or really it's worth considering maybe a couple guys on Detroit.
Okay, Paul, let's go to the wings and things department, man. Who are you looking at winger?
Well, I'm going to be stacking the Wild's entire first line, so that means Kaprizov and Zuccarello are in play. Kaprizov's 19 points in his last 10 games. That's on fire, atop the league in that range. He also is joined by Matt Zuccarello. I've touted him as one of the top playmaking wingers in the league. You get them for $7,600 and $4,800 respectively, and they're all doing better than a point a game. So that's definitely going to be the cornerstone of my DFS lineup tonight. With the Islanders struggling so badly, I know Pete likes the fact they're on a 4-game undefeated streak. I still have to include the Predators' top gun, Philip Forsberg, who's on a goal-scoring tear with 9 in the net over his last 10 games, and he's going to cost $7,000 tonight. The Stars were under siege in Vegas last night, and I wonder how much they have left in the tank for a match in LA this evening. That's why in the low end of the range, I'm considering Alex Iafallo, one of their top line wingers, who has averaged over 3 shots on goal per game in his last 10 starts and has a very weary Stars club in his sights. That'll cost only $4,400 tonight.
AJ, are you brave enough to agree with Paul for the second straight question?
And I hate this so much right now, but yeah.
My God, what is happening?
I hate it. I hate it, guys. I really
wants to
think
be right?
you got to look at that stack, man. The Wild, Kaprizov is a little more expensive, but I mean, for some reason, Zuccarello comes in at 4,800 still with 11 points in his last 8 games. I just don't know how you pass that up, and it's a good spot to be in. Maybe you look at Tyler Bertuzzi again, going back to Detroit as another option, but at 4,800, I think Zuccarello is just a must in your lineup. It's too cheap for his production level, and the matchup's just too good.
All right, Pete, bring us home here in the winger department.
I got some value on the wing. I don't think you can go wrong either way. I would definitely ride the hot hand with Sonny Milano for the reasons that Paul mentioned regarding Trevor Zegras and how he's blown up lately. Sonny Milano's along for the ride. Zegras said yesterday that Milano's one of the most skilled players that he's ever played with in his career at any level, which I think is very telling. He's flashy. He's got 7 points in his past 4 games. He's got 20 in 22 games on the season, which, right, let's be honest, guys, it puts him in the same conversation as a guy like Ryan Hartman, who was just mentioned earlier, as one of the clear breakout players of the season. I know it was Troy Terry early from Anaheim, but now it's almost shifted with the Getzlaf injury. It's like Milano and Zegras is the better line than Getzlaf or now Sam Steele with Troy Terry. So it's amazing how things change, and Sonny Milano is definitely worth going back to the well on here. And also, I wanted to mention Michael Bunting, who I've mentioned on previous shows, still playing with Matthews. They're still on a tear. Marner's out, so the focus is on Matthews and Bunting might fit your price point a little bit better than Milano. 3,900 for Bunting, 4,000 for Milano.
Pete, no one is ever going to complain on the show about value picks and helping people make some money there while not spending a whole lot of money. AJ, I'm going to let you go first here in the blue line department. So give me your favorite defenseman.
Yeah, thanks. Now Paul can maybe agree with me. So since Brett Pesce and Tony DeAngelo have been out for the Hurricanes in the COVID protocols, it's been Jacob Slavin who stepped up with 4 points, including a pair of power play helpers in their last 4 contests. He comes in really cheap still because, normally this isn't a role for him. He would not be expected to be a power play guy for them or really a big offensive contributor when those other 2 guys are in the lineup. So they aren't going to have DeAngelo or Pesce back for the next 3 games because they're still playing in Canada right now. The rules are a little bit different with the COVID protocols. So Jacob Slavin's a guy I would definitely target, and he won't break the bank for you.
Okay, Paul, you're up, man. Do you sign off on AJ's answer?
They're good picks, but they're not mine. Instead, I'm going to go to a game that AJ panned a little bit, the Boston-Edmonton matchup. I like Darnell Nurse. He gets into this tough matchup, I know, but he likes these kinds of games. He'll be a factor at both ends of the ice, particularly participating on offense with 8 points and a whopping 37 shots on goal in his last 10 games. He'll also get in the Bruins' way as he has 14 blocks at the other end of the ice. This is a two-way menace, and he'll cost $6,300 tonight, and I might pay for it. With Neil Pionk sidelined for his club, Nate Schmidt will get more high-leverage minutes. It's a high-scoring defenseman in support of the talented Jets forwards. He costs $5,100 in this role tonight, also possessing all of Nurse's attributes. I think his ownership will be significantly lower, however, unless people are looking at the RotoWire depth chart that show him as the new first-string power play quarterback there.
Yeah, I like Schmidt. Adjusting nicely to his new team there. Pete, what do you like in the defenseman department?
There's some good value options. There's Jamie Alexiak, who pretty much gets you a high floor, and he's been scoring lately for the Seattle Kraken. But I did want to mention that Drew Doughty has 11 points in 8 games this season. When he's healthy, he is a lineup lock for the LA Kings. Even though the Kings offense is a little inconsistent, he'll be out there on power play 1 with, of course, Anze Kopitar, and those are safe DFS options anytime. They're facing the Dallas Stars, who are on second of a back-to-back. So I do like Drew Doughty, who leads all defensemen in points per game this season. And he started hot before his injury. Now he's back. He's putting up big points yet again. So as much as we trend toward the younger players in LA, giving them a high ceiling in the future, the old guard is still there, Kopitar and Doughty, and they're producing as well as they ever had in their careers.
All right, before you guys take off, you know what we like to do here. Which goalie matchup you leaning towards right now? I know it's early, Pete.
Yeah, let's see who's confirmed. Definitely, Cam Talbot is one of the hottest goalies in the league right now, skyrocketing in our rankings on NHL.com/fantasy this past week, but he's unconfirmed. I also, like I mentioned, if Ilya Sorokin gets the start for New York, he's been really strong, even during this horrible losing streak for the Islanders, .924 save percentage on the season. So those are two guys I'm looking at. Obviously, Talbot's going to be more expensive than Sorokin, but try to get one of those two guys in your lineup. Sorokin only 7,700, has 3 shutouts on the season, almost had 2 more, so shutout potential any given night. If the Islanders are going to bounce back, finally get that home win, it just might be a shutout. Even though Nashville's top line is so good, I think they're pretty one-dimensional, top-heavy team. So Sorokin could shut it down any given night.
AJ, who should people try to roster in the crease?
Well, so in addition to just the good matchup for Minnesota, like Talbot or Kakkonen, the Wild are on a 7-game win streak with these guys. And if you look at their last 3 games, they've actually allowed 37.3 shots per game. That's second highest in the league for the month of December. So they're seeing high volume, but still racking up wins and not giving up a ton of goals. I think either one of those guys is in play tonight for Minnesota.
Yeah, Paul, the Wild are the hottest team in the league right now. Which netminder are you looking at early on here?
I'm stunned. I thought that AJ would jump all over the Hawks in Montreal. I always say my favorite team is whoever's playing the Canadiens. And tonight I'm on Marc-Andre Fleury. He was rocked for a 5 spot in his last start, but he's going home tonight. So I think he's going to want to put a show on in front of his home province. The Canadiens stink, and Fleury will get the W tonight for $8,000. His backup, Kevin Lankinen, is similarly priced. Make sure you get the right goalie in here. I also think the Jets have way too much firepower for the Seattle-based opponent the way they're clicking right now. And with Hellebuck in goal, he should be in position for a relatively easy win over the expansion club. He'll cost $7,900 tonight.
Yeah, Marc-Andre Fleury, since that first month of the season, definitely has improved his play for the Blackhawks there. Guys, that was fun. Good stuff. We still have to price check around the NBA. But first, Thursday Night Football Showdown picks and best bets are coming up next. And 3, 2, I don't know. We're just talking like behind the scenes about, Jeff being an incredible parent. Good stuff. Anyway, week 14 around the NFL does kick off tonight with the Steelers and Vikings. Thursday night football here, dudes. DraftKings contributor Jeff Ulrich, Pierce Dietrich, Reed T. Fowler. They are here to share their favorite DFS and sportsbook plays for Pittsburgh, Minnesota. Adam Thielen is out, right? Dalvin Cook, though, latest reports have him trending towards playing just 11 days after dislocating his left shoulder. Jeff, who's your captain tonight, and why is it Mr. Primetime, Kirk Cousins?
Yes. I actually think Kirk Cousins is an interesting pivot play, but I'm not going to go with Kirk Cousins. I think that you should really be looking to the wide receivers in this game. We've got the Vikings who've given up the most yards per pass attempt against in the league over the last 3 games, and you've got the Steelers who are going to be without Joe Hayden. I just think everyone's probably going to be thinking the same thing with Justin Jefferson. I think there's a lot of potential, though, with Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. I'll throw out Deontay Johnson as my favorite just because I think Claypool is still dealing with some kind of injury, just hasn't looked himself. Deontay Johnson at 10-2 in the flex, and he's he's more expensive, but he's a lot cheaper than Justin Jefferson in the captain spot at 15-3. That gives you salary flexibility and also gives you a lot of lower ownership here. I think it also gives you good leverage because I think a lot of people will be looking at Najee Harris against a weaker Vikings rush defense. But the Vikings are getting some linebackers back this week, so I don't know if it's going to be smooth sailing for Harris. I really like Deontay Johnson. The targets are going to be there. He's healthy, and like I said, this Vikings pass defense has been brutal most of the year, and especially the last 3 games. Yeah,
dude, Vikings have allowed the most DraftKings points to wide receivers, too. So all signs point to another busy and productive outing for him. Reed, what do you want to do at captain?
We already know this. We already know the answer to this question. It's Kirk Cousins.
Yeah!
Come on now. No, it's... Look, here's the stats, right? He ranks 3rd amongst quarterbacks with at least 100 attempts in PFF. Passing grade, 4th in adjusted pass percentage. Completion percentage, 5th in passer rating. So the stats are there. And I actually think that to what Jeff was talking about with a lot of people going to Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook potentially being back and people saying, hey, if I'm in my fantasy season-long playoffs and I'm playing Dalvin Cook, he has to be a player that I have to play in showdown, right? There's people out there who will do that. I'm not saying that's the right play, but I do think there is some leverage that you can get with Kirk Cousins. I don't think his roster percentage is going to be that high in the captain spot. And look what he's going to do against a 30th adjusted DVOA defense in the Pittsburgh Steelers. Their defense is not good, and they're going to be without Joe Hayden. So give me that beautiful number 8, Kirk Cousins in the captain spot, baby.
Oh, man. Wow. Pierce, who's your guy, man? 1.5 times the salary, but 1.5 times the point in return.
I agree with everything they're saying, but I'll be the fool and I will follow the crowd and I'll just play Justin Jefferson.
Yes.
So, well, I get it. Everyone's going to want to play him, but there's a reason why everyone wants to play him. And they've mentioned all the stats. This is a bad pass defense. We know he has a tremendous ceiling, and that's with Thielen on the field. Thielen is gone. We're going to see a volume and usage rate that we probably haven't seen with Jefferson all season. Joe Hayden is out. The one thing you worry about, Pittsburgh does have a good pressure rate. They're number 1 in adjusted sack rate, but Minnesota's got a great offensive line. They are top 5 in adjusted sack rate. They're top 5 in pressure, top 5 in quarterback hurry. So Cousins, as bad as he's been and as inconsistent as he has been at times, he'll have time to pass the ball, and he's going to feed the ball to Jefferson. You can get multiple touchdowns from him. We can get over 100 yards. I have no problem just following the crowd and taking Jefferson.
And he has scored 25.9 DK fantasy points 3 times over the past 4 weeks. That includes one that was north of 40 points. I like it, Pierce. Okay, Pierce and Jeff, this is when we love to talk to you guys about showdown plays. Favorite value play? Favorite value play tonight in a showdown. Pierce, are you making up another player?
No. Well, if you consider former Jacksonville players made-up players, Didi Westbrook.
Yeah!
We've seen him. He's been flashy and splashy at times in the past, and he's going to step in here. I know people might expect KJ Osborne to get a bigger role, but he's played 46% of the snaps in the slot. I would imagine they're not going to suddenly just change his role from slot receiver to immediately swapping over to the outside. He'll pick up some of Thielen's work and 2 receiver sets on the outside. But for the most part, I expect Didi Westbrook to play at least 60% of the snaps. We've already mentioned this is a bad pass defense. I know we're hearing about Cook, and we know about Madison, and the Vikings can run, and this is a defense you can run against. The issue is the Vikings just don't want to run. Cousins has passed the ball the 5th most times this season. Although they can run, they like to pass. And Jefferson's going to get high volume. Where else is it going to go? Maybe Conklin. Westbrook, we've seen him hit these big plays. He's going to be in a spot. I like it.
Oh, you are brilliant. I love you for that. Go ahead, Jeff.
I mean, okay, this is the galaxy brain thinking here. Again, we're talking strategy for big showdowns, big field GPPs. Everyone's looking at the Minnesota situation. Thielen's out, Osborne, Didi Westbrook, and I agree, like Westbrook's cheap, so I'd probably prefer him over Osborne too. But what about the other side? Chase Claypool only played 63% of the snaps last week. Guess who also played over 60% of the snaps? Ray Mcleod the third played over 60% of the snaps. He's getting a bunch of work, and his targeting has been a little bit spotty, but it's also been pretty high volume in spots. And I just finished talking about how bad this Minnesota Vikings secondary is. It's a player with good speed. Definitely can catch a deep ball, and you might see him play more here than you realize because Chase Claypool, I don't think is 100%, and now it's a short week too. So who knows what his status is going to be like. And look, I mean, he also went off about Mike Tomlin, talking about the music in practice, so maybe he's still holding a grudge. I just think McLeod is a good big field GPP target because I think Pittsburgh's going to be passing here more than people think. They are the underdogs, and McLeod's cheap, and most eyes aren't going to be on him.
Reed, hook me up with some value for tonight, dude.
Yeah, what about the guy last week who called the Dallas defense and they scored 17 points for my value play? Not like Simi Fehoko, who had 0 targets, 0 catches, and zeros across the board. But
Yo, did you see that pronunciation? That was.
well, I
He's a
mean, I would
master.
hope so. I grew up in in Polynesia. But anyway, I digress. Ray McLeod, that was gonna be my guy, Jeff. I was sort of on the same narrative, the same train of thought as you were. 67% of the snaps, he ran 19 routes. That's more than James Washington, right? So, like Chase Claypool and these guys are going to be out there, but that's that third receiver position, James Robinson, that you got to figure that Ray McLeod, if he gets one of these bigger plays, that he could break one off, right? And Pat Freiermuth, I think, is going to be a popular play. But remember, the Minnesota defense, they're getting the linebackers back. The guys mentioned it. Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, they're practicing full. They're going to be back. And Harrison Smith, these guys have been really good defending tight ends. So I don't think Freiermuth is actually going to be a factor in this one. That leads to more 3 wide receiver sets, and I think Ray McLeod gets it.
Reed, take us to the DK Sportsbook, please. Your favorite player prop for this Thursday night.
Yeah, I'm going to be L7 square like Pierce here and go with Justin Jefferson over 92.5 receiving yards minus 115. This guy's been playing out of his mind recently. Since week 10, the guy's averaging 145 receiving yards, 8 catches on 12 targets. And his matchup, Arthur Millette, Cam Sutton, Akila Weatherspoon, these guys are not good in coverage. Justin Jefferson, we've seen this. We talked about it yesterday, Emerson, that when the star guy goes down, and even if Dalvin Cook is in, but he's at 50 or 60%, whatever he's at, or excuse me, Adam Thielen out and also Cook, it doesn't necessarily go to a KJ Osborne or those type of players when one player is out. It goes to the next best talented player, and that's Justin Jefferson. He is the most talented receiver and player on this team in this game. So, yeah, give me that over 92.5 receiving yards.
Okay, cool. What do you want here, Mr. Pierce?
Well, I'm going to disagree with the panel, and I don't like the Pittsburgh pass attack in this game. So give me Ben Roethlisberger under 257.5 yards passing. Mike Zimmer has faced Ben Roethlisberger 15 times. He's very familiar with him. He limited Ben during his heyday when Ben had a good line and had weapons with the Steelers. Well, he doesn't have a line. He doesn't have very many. I mean, we're talking about Ray Mcleod. What are we doing here? Does he have the weapons to pass for yards? I don't think so. Zimmer does a really good job of mixing up his schemes, a lot of pre-snap read motion that I think is going to mess with Ben Roethlisberger. We've seen him struggle with that this season already. And when we've seen him play well, it's been against kind of some vanilla man-to-man defenses. He's not going to face that. He's going to deal with pressure. I think this Pittsburgh team is really going to struggle to move the ball. You're going to see 3 and outs. You're going to see punts. I don't see the yards coming through the air.
Yeah, he's been under that mark, I believe, in 6 of his 11 starts, too. Jeff, player prop you like?
Pierce disagreeing with the panel that he's also on is next level. I like the over on Justin Jefferson's props too, but I think a different way you can play it on the DraftKings Sportsbook is, again, go to my favorite section, which is the player props. Almost hit Damian Harris last week at big odds, but you can get over Justin Jefferson over 125 yards and Deontay Johnson over 125 yards at plus 1,000, or you can go with Claypool and Jefferson at over 100 yards each at plus 1,000. Sprinkle both. That way, Jefferson, like we said, we all like him to go over like 90 yards. Why not just take him in these bigger props? And then you just, basically whichever Pittsburgh receiver goes off, if Reed and I are right and Pierce is wrong, you get paid here. So I think that's a really interesting prop. Again, for all of Ben's faults, I mean, he's going up against probably the weakest pass defense Mike Zimmer has ever had. So I still think there'll be big plays there for Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. Again, player props, Claypool and Jefferson, Deontay Johnson and Claypool, you can get big odds there.
Jeff, what's your favorite bet overall tonight as we wrap up this segment with Slate Approved Pick?
Yeah, I'm gonna roll with the Vikings here at -3. I don't think this line is super incorrect, but I do think the Vikings are getting a little bit disrespected coming off a loss. Since 2017, Mike Zimmer is 20-10 ATS after a loss. I'll roll with the Vikings here -3.
God, they've been a dreadful bet, though, this season. 1-9 ATS in their last 10 games. Wow, okay.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, not a problem, bud. That's what I'm here for, an expert host. Reed.
Yeah, I just saw a thing come across my phone that Dalvin Cook is a game time decision.
Okay.
I don't think that we were thinking otherwise
Great.
on that, but I'm going my guy Cousins. Oh, I don't know, my guy. I've become a Kirk Cousins.
This is
fan, so I don't know
ridiculous.
why. Over 22.5 completions, 7th amongst 38 qualified quarterbacks in passer rating under pressure. So, Pierce mentioned it that the Steelers do bring a lot of pressure, but you take a look at his grades out in PFF under pressure, and he's solid. He's like top 5, top 10 in that category. And so when you take a look at that, 22.5 completions, I don't think that's out of the question. So that's at minus 125.
Pierce, Slater Proof pick, your favorite bet.
I'm with Jeff, but Jeff didn't really go enough into detail. Yeah, the Vikings are being disrespected. They lost last week to a Lions team that's pretty much a 500 team, as we all know.
God.
So we shouldn't take too much away from that loss. In all seriousness, though, the Steelers tied that team as well. And really, what I really think this line reflects is they gave up a touchdown pass on the last play of the game, and you flip it around, you look at the Steelers, the Ravens miss a 2-point conversion. Let's imagine that the Ravens get that 2, and the Lions don't catch that pass for a touchdown against the prevent defense on the last play of the game. This line would be much higher. So give me the Vikings -3.
Okay. That was also a Mason Rudolph game with the Steelers when they tied the Lions. Just throwing that out there. Again, expert host. Thanks, guys. Appreciate all your help. You did a fantastic job. We're going to bring it home with some NBA price check right after our final break. All right, guys, we're bringing it home with our NBA panel this morning. DraftKings contributors Nick Fryer, Gary and Thorne, Matt Meiselman. Good morning. NBA price check time. Favorite DFS plays in each price range and the odds that have nice prices on tonight's 3-game slate. So we will start with which center over $6,000 are you going with tonight, Garion?
Yeah, not going to make things too complicated at center. I'm just going to go with Nikola Jokic. Last 10 games he's played without Michael Porter Jr. in the lineup. 33% usage rate, averaging over 1.7 DraftKings points per minute played. Triple doubles on back-to-back games. Is he going to be chalky? Very possibly. Although I will say, even on a slate this small, the center position is kind of stacked. So I'm just putting Jokic in there to start, and I'll figure out the rest later.
Nick, does his price make you think twice, though?
I mean, not really. I mean, like Gary highlighted, he's been on fire. And as much as I want to go and say you should get a little exposure to a B tonight if you're using multiple lineups, I really can't make that case. But if you are looking to save a little bit of money, I do like Jakob Poeltl on the other side of this lineup, because when you look at the past performances of opposing centers, Jonas Valanciunas, I know he's been having a good year, but still 27-11 last game. Vucevic the game before, 20-10. Randall 24-7-8 the game before that. Even Wendell Carter Jr. had a solid game against Jokic. And then when you look at Poeltl, he's flirting with a double-double every night. You look at his season averages. He has 3 double-doubles recently, and he's returning 5 times value on this price over his last 10 games. Even his season average is right around there too. So if you're trying to save some money, I know Jokic isn't the guy to save on, but Hurl's still a guy who you can put in a utility spot too.
Is Jokic a no-brainer? Matty coming off back-to-back triple-doubles.
I think he would be, but I actually think there's at least a 20% chance he doesn't play tonight.
Whoa.
Jokic had that wrist injury that kept him out for a few games, and he was on the injury report yesterday with a forearm injury. Not sure if that's directly related, but he just played an overtime game in New Orleans. Now they're going into San Antonio, second night of a back-to-back. He's clearly not 100%. Whether that actually matters in terms of his effectiveness, I think it probably doesn't. Like, he's, in my mind, by far the best player in the NBA, even in a season where Steph Curry is doing all the crazy things he's doing. But I think that Denver has got to be a little worried about his health. So I think he most likely plays. And if he does, I think he's the best choice. Although I do think Pirtle is a decent choice too. But this slate is going to look a lot different if Nikola Jokic is not on it. So it's kind of TBD. But if he's out there, I definitely like him a lot.
For sure. Another reminder to follow DK Live on Twitter, everybody, for the most up-to-date updates when it comes to which players will be playing and which players will not be playing. Nick, at forward, which player do you like over $6,000?
I really don't like the forward position much at all tonight. If you're going to pay up, obviously you want to go with LeBron. To me is the obvious choice. Of course, he's the most expensive forward available. But when you look at what the Grizzlies have done against opposing forwards, not that great. If Embiid doesn't play, and the only reason I would think that is because it's a back-to-back, then Tobias Harris becomes a viable option. But this is the position where I try and save a little bit and spend up maybe at center and then maybe spend up a little bit at guard. Go with guys like Rudy Gay or Royce O'Neal. You could go with both. I hesitate to say both, but either way, they're big-time salary savers. And then we look at the 76ers have done. I know both teams are coming in off back-to-back, but the 76ers are not good against opposing forwards either. So these are two guys that could go and at least give you the value on their price.
Matt, you in the same boat as Nick here? Not a fan of this position?
Yeah, although if Embiid does sit also, and I do think that that's a real possibility, then Tobias Harris does look very appealing. So I totally agree there. I think the guy that most people are going to play here is Dillon Brooks. He definitely takes on a much larger role with Ja Morant out, but Brooks is someone who can pick up a lot of fouls really quickly because he's someone who's generally tasked with guarding the opponent's best player. Last night, that was Luka Doncic. He got in a little foul trouble. Tonight, that's probably LeBron. So I think some other Memphis guys maybe saving some money. There's John Conchar, who's guard forward eligible, 3,500. I think this is the position where you just play someone way off the board, unless we get some news, because then things could change. Maybe you get Tobias Harris, looks really good. But as it stands, I think this is the position where someone like Conchar, maybe someone like Desmond Bane's down to guard only, so I can't even pick him. Yeah, I'll just stick with Conchar. That's the pivot off Brooks, maybe, where he could step in if Brooks gets in foul trouble.
Garrett, hook me up with a forward north of $6,000.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think Dillon Brooks is someone who does get in a lot of foul trouble, and so does his teammate, Jaren Jackson Jr. Like, you essentially have a situation with Memphis where you like both of those guys regardless of the matchup. It's really just about their foul trouble and whether or not they can stay on the court long enough to accumulate fantasy points. I mean, Jaren Jackson Jr., on a per-minute basis, from an efficiency standpoint, has been an amazing DFS asset since Ja Morant went down. It's just that some nights he only plays 27, 28 minutes. I think he should be in line to play a bunch tonight against the Lakers. And Los Angeles is a team very susceptible to power forwards in particular. They've given up the second most opponent points in the paint per game so far this season. So I think Jackson could be in line for a pretty big night if he's able to stay on the court. He's gone over 40 DraftKings points in 3 of his last 5 games. It's just about whether or not he's actually able to play 35 minutes. But I like his price point and I like his potential at 7K.
Guys, less than 2 minutes to go in the show, so we'll wrap it up here. Matt, hook me up with a guard north of $6K.
So I think this is the position where I'm most inclined to just play the popular play, and that's Derek White. So Keldon Johnson got hurt the other night against the Knicks, and the Spurs are just kind of thin. I mean, there's some guys that they're giving 10, 15 minutes to off the bench, but as far as their main scorers, it's DeJounte Murray and it's Derek White. They don't have a ton else. And if Jokic isn't out there, I think it's the low-key consequence there is that Denver's defense gets a lot worse, and they also have to play a lot faster because there's no backup center on this team. Like when Jokic doesn't play, you see Jeff Green and JaMychal Green handling the center minutes. So it's much worse interior defense. It's a faster game because there's more guards, a smaller group on the court. But either way, I think White just has to step into a larger role with no Keldon Johnson, maybe a couple extra minutes. He played really well against the Knicks, so he could be really popular. But I think it's still worth at just a little bit over 6K. I think that's too cheap for White.
Gary, and hook me up in 10 seconds.
Yeah, White's the play, but I will shout out DeJounte Murray, over 50 DraftKings points in 6 of his last 10 games. He leads the team in usage rate. and in potential assists per game, he could also see a little usage bump with Keldon.
Nick, you have 10 seconds as well.
DeJounte Murray is the guy that I like White, but DeJounte is the guy I'm totally comfortable paying up for.
Gentlemen, that was fantastic. Thanks for all the help today. Everybody, we got a Madden slate kicking off here at noon. Also, 5 o'clock slate tonight with Kaufman and Reed. They'll talk more Thursday Night Football. And then I'll see everyone back here tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock for a Friday edition of